Hey listeners, we're nearing the end of our 15th anniversary fundraising campaign, and we need your help to meet our goal. This campaign offers you a chance to win a unique food and music experience in one of the most exciting cities in America. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and you'll be entered to win dinner for two and 2 tickets to a concert in one of 8 amazing cities: New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Ardmore, Pennsylvania, and Asheville. All donations support our work educating food system storytellers. And when you donate, you can choose one of those cities and you'll be entered to win dinner and 2 tickets to a show. So help us reach our goal and enter to win dinner and a show in the city of your choice. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We've been making cheese in Wisconsin since before we were even a state, which may be one reason why we win so many awards for it. It's what happens when a whole state dreams in cheese. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Welcome to the Grape Nation, your weekly wine journey. Our guest is Raj Vaidya. We'll talk to Raj about champagne, Burgundies, the laws, and more. We'll taste a little champagne for our weekly wine sip. I'm your host, Sam Ben-Ruby. Stay with us for the Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network. We bring wine to the people. Jersey boy Raj Vaidya has been grinding in the wine business for over 20 years at some of the finest restaurants in the country. His longest tenure was with legendary chef Daniel Boulud in New York City, where he served as sommelier and beverage director. Like many somms, Raj left the floor and ultimately joined Daniel Johns as director of operations of Gracie Events, the people behind La Palais, La Fête du Champagne, La Table, and Pressoir Wine. Raj also does fine wine consulting. The 8th edition of La Fête du Champagne is coming to New York City November 6th through the 13th, live for the first time since the pandemic. Welcome back to the Grape Nation, Raj. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Sam.
All right, so we're talking to Raj remotely. Initially, Raj was going to sit in the studio, but business called him out west. Where are you right now?
I'm in Los Angeles, sunny California, and I'm bummed that I won't be able to drink champagne with you, but it is only 10 in the morning here. So
you're going to talk. You're going to talk to me about it. You know, you're going to describe and explain everything.
Totally.
All right, let's get right into it. Raj, after many years in the biz, you know, and with Daniel Boulud, you recently left the somm and the beverage director thing to pursue your own, you know, current gig. But before we get into the gig, which there's a lot to discuss, tell me a few things. What effect did the pandemic have on your decision to leave what you were doing, if it did? What did you do during the pandemic? And, you know, ultimately was the pandemic, you know, the main reason for moving on. So tell me a little about all that.
So as luck would have had it in my favor, I had actually made the decision to leave the restaurants around Christmas the year prior in 2019. Okay. And it was a culmination of a number of things. Firstly, I have to say, and I want to say this over and over again, I had the best job in the wine business. And I certainly didn't leave because I got tired or because the job wasn't great anymore or because I had any issues with Danielle or the company. I mean, really, I couldn't have been luckier to work with such an amazing team and for such an amazing chef for such a long period of time. That's the reason I stayed so long. You know, I had I got to taste all the greatest wines in the world. I got to travel a ton. I got to work with amazing people. That was the best. the reasons that I made the decision to move were less about, me being tired of being on the floor and more about me hitting a point in my life where I thought, I have to think about what the rest of my career looks like and build something that can really relate to me. And you and I had discussed in the past that I had some private clients who I would buy wine for. I did a little bit of corporate consulting here and there, and that consulting business kind of grew into a place where I realized I could make a go of it. So I had planned on leaving. In fact, the restaurants closed, I think, on the 13th of March. I can't remember the exact date now, but whatever that Friday was. My last day was set to be April 1st. So I was already en route, so to speak. The pandemic.
Wait, so you said you made the decision the prior December. Your
Yes.
leave date was April?
Yes.
Anyway.
I wasn't about to walk out of the door and leave 17 restaurants,
I know
millions
that.
of dollars of inventory unmatched. So it was really about a transition period. And really, we were searching for my replacement. So the biggest thing that the pandemic affected was that it moved my date to April 1st because business had been, much quieter in the first quarter in the restaurants in general. And frankly, with that level of inventory, the CEO and Danielle and myself all agreed that maybe they didn't need a corporate beverage director right at that moment. It was something that could kick that can down the road a little bit, certainly until the end of the summer. And my initial pledge to Danielle was that I'm not leaving until you're covered. But then it seemed like he was going to be fine going into the summer. Of course, in retrospect, and hindsight being 2020, I feel like all of our decision making and thought process seems kind of ridiculous when we saw what happened. A week later. But to continue answering your questions, so the pandemic had no bearing on my decision. However, it did move the timeline up a little bit, and so I took a month and a half. Sitting on my couch like everybody else. And, after 25 years in the restaurant business, I had expected the transition to be extremely brutal because, you have to change your whole lifestyle. But yet another thing that I was lucky about is that while I was sitting on my couch at home with nothing to do, so was everybody else I knew. So I didn't really feel like I was in a bad situation. I didn't feel lonely or lonelier than anybody else.
Or unproductive.
Right. I already knew how to use Zoom, for better or worse, on account of the fact that we used that platform in the company prior. And so, the transition became relatively easy, although, of course, I was in New York City through those first couple of months, and it was very high stress and a dark time, for sure, eviscerating in many ways. Then I got into conversation with Daniel Jonas, the founder of Gracie Events, which is the parent company to the festivals La Paulée, La Fête du Champagne, La Table, and a platform called Pressoir.wine, which was really kind of conceived as a wine club and just to facilitate activities throughout the year that weren't specific to that to any one specific festival. And we decided that maybe it would be a good thing if we joined forces. Daniel,
but you had a connection to Daniel,
a very strong one. Daniel hired me at Restaurant Danielle as the head sommelier back in 2009. He continued to be the corporate beverage director up through 2016, after which he kept a sort of connection and a role, and certainly the title also, but he moved to Lyon that year. And so there was a little time where he kind of stepped away. But really what he did was he gave me the opportunity to step into that role, and he put me up for it. He told Danielle that I was the right person to help lead the company forward from an operations standpoint. And so he really put me in that role. Always very thankful for that. But we worked together at Restaurant Danielle, and I've worked at all of his festivals for years. So I knew it very well. And the thought kind of crossed my mind too. It's like, well, what can I do to build my consulting company into something more? Because I don't want to just buy wine for corporations or rich people. I want to teach people about wine. I want to communicate about wine to a broad range of consumers. I want to make sure that the wines I love and the regions I love, the people I love to work with, are spoken about and communicated well to American consumers, because this is where we live. And Daniel's amazing at that. His festivals have always done a great job of that. Pressoir, as it was conceived, was intended to continue to do that. And so we came to an agreement, and I merged those consulting activities into his company in the beginning of May last year. And so I've been busy.
Right. So So did you travel at all? Because when we get into the events, we're
Right.
going to describe some were virtual, some, are live, and that you were on the road. When did you start traveling?
Well,
this year?
traveling was impossible last year
Right.
for all of the obvious reasons. We kind of conceived of how La Palais would look. And actually, this came about. Let me take it back to La Fête de Champagne last year. Daniel didn't want to not do an event of any kind and just ignore that there was an event planned or that there was some cultural significance to it. So we did a virtual version of La Fête du Champagne, which involved a series of virtual seminars. A grand tasting, which was completely virtual, so people could purchase the champagnes in various formats and packs from our retail partner, and then follow along through a guided tasting and interview with each winemaker. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
Were people hungry at that point to reconnect with wine and champagne? I mean, was it successful?
It was pretty successful. It was pretty successful. I think that at the end of the summer last year, it was getting into the cold months, so we had pretty good attendance. But there was certainly Zoom fatigue, later in the summer.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. And also, frankly, I also just think that certainly in New York and in a lot of places in the world, last fall wasn't the brightest, sunniest moment for anybody. It was better than the spring, but it was getting tough. We were stuck at home. There's no end in sight. What the rest of our lives looked like, what the rest of the business looked like, was tough. But fast forward, if I may, just very quickly, we did it again with Paulet in January. Or rather, we went to France in January, but we did it in March, and that was much more successable. I'm happy to talk about that in a second, but I didn't mean to.
Yeah, I want to get into more of that, but we'll get to that because I want to take each one. About things being dark during the pandemic. I mean, a lot of your friends in the business, I'm sure, have stayed the course. Things eventually slowly opened, but I'm sure a bunch have moved on. Do you think the pandemic, when you look around, shined a light on, sort of what was right and wrong with hospitality? I mean, people look at it as a glamour industry, restaurants are palaces, chefs are rock stars, sommeliers, are now cool. But a lot of that, a lot of that changed. Do you think people realize, wait a second, the hours are crazy or the way I'm being treated? I mean, do you have a sense or a feel of that? Not saying that happened where you were, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but just generally, what's your thoughts on that?
The work culture of the restaurant business is very, very demanding and difficult. The hours are long. The work, if there's some suggestion of like the rock star ideal, I think that's clearly laid bare as being nonsense today, right? Because it's such a difficult realm. I mean, just from a business standpoint, there is no business in the world which makes sense at such slim margins with that much effort, work, and consequence. And the sad truth is that in America, for sure, although this is not untrue elsewhere, restaurant workers are mostly, considered as second-class citizens because there's very little in the way of welfare to protect them. There's almost no chance of saving for retirement in a traditional manner. There's no personal time off. There's no check-ins about mental health. So did the pandemic shine a light on that? Absolutely. I think it did in many industries. I think healthcare is possibly even worse off, but there's a lot of thankless jobs that at least were exposed as being what they actually are. Has that changed or gotten better? I can't speak to that clearly, but I'll tell you that in many restaurants that I observe, and we do some restaurant consulting now, so I'm starting to see more and more of the floor, if you will, the way I did before. But taking a step back after 25 years and realizing the biggest thing that has to change for anything to really change the substantive is going to take a lot longer than 1.5 years of realizing that there's a problem. or accepting, or
Well,
that there's a problem.
realizing isn't necessarily action either, and I agree
It's
with
certainly
you.
not.
The
Well,
action's going to take a long time.
Indeed, but the action also has to kind of play out through the course of history and contracts. Think about it this way, Sam. If I opened a restaurant in 2009 at the rent that I was paying then, I built that business plan paying waiters $3 an hour or so,
Right.
paying insurance for nobody, maybe a manager's salary because it was in the doldrums after the '08 crisis at like 50, 60, 70, 80 grand, depending on the size of the restaurant. The sommelier was in the tip pool. I could pay them, a salary of 25 grand and never have to pay them hourly because the law was gray at the time. Fast forward that 6 years. The minimum wage is $15. That sommelier has to be paid $15, but you actually have to pay them more because they're effectively, managing,
Right.
one of your biggest assets. You have to provide healthcare. You have to provide care for your employees. And it's not to say that this isn't what should be the case. Certainly it should. But there is no welfare system in America that takes care of its citizens. So at that level, when there's such a giant problem, and so it would fall on when it starts to fall on the employers, and their business plan was written for a different economic model. The economic model has to change. Their rent has to change. Their subsidies from the government have to change in order to make it viable. Otherwise, the restaurant closes. Everyone loses their jobs, and that's the horizon and the timeline that I'm kind of talking about here. That's what's going to have to change, especially in New York City, and the biggest thing there being rent and labor. I mean, those are rent was always the most expensive thing. Labor has become the most expensive thing, and if a restaurant was built prior to those changes occurring, which are positive changes, then its viability is in question.
Yeah, those are all very good points, and I think to that point, it is going to take a while, and I'm not sure the restaurant industry, is the best self-taught, swiftest. These are people that their heads are down, they're on the ground, just really going day to day, and like you said, the margins aren't good. So hopefully, people will see the way, and see the light, because we want everyone to be treated equal, flourish, and have opportunities.
Absolutely.
So we'll see how that goes. All right, let's talk a little about your company, Gracie Events. Let's lead with La Fête de Champagne. This event is coming in November. Last year, as we discussed, you had to cancel the live event and pivot to virtual. Good job, by the way. I didn't tell you.
Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in. We had a lot of fun doing it. Yeah.
There's good depth to the content. Good
well,
people.
we learned, so La Fête will be occurring in person. It's the first live event that the company will host, and we're so excited about it. You and I had to exchange many, many more emails than we typically do, because initially it was set to happen this coming Saturday, the 16th of October.
Right.
And a few weeks ago, about a month ago, we got word handed down. It was funny. We were on a team call in the morning, and one of my colleagues, who is French, her mother in France, texted her and said, "The borders are reopening. I can come early November." Justine, my colleague, has a little one whose mom hasn't been able to visit here stateside. And so we were like, "Oh, that's amazing. That's great. Oh, shoot. The fete is going to happen 2 weeks before. It's such a shame. I mean, it's a shame we can't change the date." And then it clicked in all of our minds kind of at the same moment. We're saying, no, we can't not change the date. The notion that we would have a champagne party without any champenois here is completely anathema to what the whole culture and point of what we do is. And so we moved the date, which was kudos to the team I work with that managed to pull this off. I'm in awe every day. But we managed to move it a month later. So now it'll occur, as you said, from the 6th through the 13th. Now, the reason we start the 6th, which is the prior Saturday, is that, frankly, when we started planning for this, we didn't know what the fall would look like. We didn't know if people could be in a room together. We were still at 10 people at max at a gathering. Very few people were vaccinated. We didn't know for sure that the vaccines had that level of efficacy, because the number of people who'd been vaccinated was fairly small. So in June, as we did this past January for La Paulée, my colleague Max and Peter Liam and I went to France and developed some content for some specific seminars so that if everything were to shut down again, touch wood, not happening, feeling good about this fall, but we just didn't know back then. So we built a bunch of seminars and a bunch of content. We spent 2 weeks in Champagne, visiting everybody, tasting with them, reconnecting with them, interviewing winemakers in the vines, in the cellars. And so I think we've developed some pretty rich content. We learned a lot from doing seminars last year for Lafette, which were really mostly interactive with the winemakers and were great content, but were maybe less informative because they tended to be conversations, and conversations can sometimes meander and, especially with a set amount of time. And also we focused a lot more on like the guided tasting aspect, which I've come to realize. I think that most people want to taste wine on their own. They're interested in what we have to offer to learn something, if it's not in person. So we kind of switched that a little bit up during the Paulée. We managed to spend a month in Burgundy developing similar content, and that was truly amazing. It was also just amazing to be anywhere except for New York City by that point.
Right. You were hungry.
Oh man, it was such a peculiar time because we had a 6 p.m. curfew every day, which we learned how to flaunt a little bit as the weeks went on. France was pretty much locked down. Yeah,
as
pretty
tough
much locked
as
down.
Anywhere.
But we had a great time. It was great to see the winemakers, and also, frankly, the winemakers were happy to see us. Which in Burgundy they're overrun, so it's a treat when they actually are excited to spend time with you.
Yeah, they're even more remote, than we were during the pandemic. Now back to Lafite, just give people an idea, so if they close their eyes, the live event, which is coming back, visualize what it is. It's sort of a smorgasbord in a very good way of champagne, so talk to me about it, the producers, the depth,
absolutely. So we lead into the final Saturday, the finale, with a handful of smaller dinners. We're going to do an amazing dinner with some great back vintages from Champagne de Rapier in the Aube. Amazing property, great family, and very excited to have them join us. We're going to do a super cool lunch, which sadly sold out almost immediately as it went on sale, with Vincent Laval, tiny producer in Cumières. We'll talk more about him, you and I, towards the end of this program. We are doing a dinner with Olivier Krug, which is super, super exciting, of course.
Sure.
Because he's the best, and the wines are spectacular.
He's a very he's a very personable guy.
He's gregarious, magnanimous, personable, all of the stuff. And the ability to show some older Grand Cuvées is going to be one of the highlights, although plenty of other fancy wines. And then we'll lead into the finale. So a grand tasting with all of the producers who are in attendance, pouring their current releases and standing
dozens and dozens, right?
Dozens and dozens. So we're using a space
and multiple SKUs from some of these guys.
Yes, for sure. 3 to 4 wines from each producer.
Yeah.
So you really get a sense for each producer, be it a house or a grower. We're using a very large space to do this, Pier 60. And because it's all dedicated to the tasting, we're able to really spread people out. We'll have some of the most amazing and exciting restaurants that have captured our attention over the course of the last year, participating, including a client of mine, Dhamaka Indian restaurant on the Lower East Side. Where
maybe the hottest restaurant in New York now.
Yeah, we should talk about that a little bit later too, because that's part of our restaurant consulting gig, and I'm just super excited to write wine lists for Indian restaurants.
They're
finally
killing it.
Saigon Social, Helen is a dear friend who used to work with me at Danielle, and she has this amazing restaurant on the Lower East Side. If you haven't heard about it, you should check that out.
No, I do.
Of course, Chef Danielle will make an appearance with something from Épicerie. So the opportunity in the beautiful light right on the river, granted with a view of New Jersey.
We like that, you and
I.
We do,
right? Yeah. Well, it's not the prettiest part of it, but it doesn't look so bad. And the opportunity to taste hundreds of champagnes and really to taste them with the producers. So you really get that intimate moment and experience. That evening, we'll be hosting our gala dinner, producers in attendance, older wines from their cellars, collectors from the U.S., all over the U.S. Who are coming, bringing wines from their cellars. And it's truly an amazing moment of people sharing wine, getting excited about the region. And, Lafette is peculiar and long predates my entry into the organization, but it was really conceived by Peter and by Peter Liam and Daniel Jonas, as a place where the region could be celebrated without drawing distinctions and lines that are meant to divide. And that specifically is with regards to the structure of the business of champagne. People who grow grapes, people who sell the grapes, people who make their own champagne, people who or make their own champagne from their own vineyards, houses that kind of do both, houses that only buy grapes. We represent everything at this festival, and it's really about the region as a whole, and I really respect that immensely, and it's one of the things I loved about this event. I've been lucky enough to work it since the first one, and I can't wait for the next one. And also, let's be honest, we're so sick of having these tiny parties or having such a hard time getting together. This is going to be the first real opportunity, and the festival will live up to its name. It will be
I think a lot of
sure.
people are thinking like you, and fortunately, and it's served it well in the past, the space is so big,
it's huge,
and spread out that as far as a public event,
but I can't overstate. Yeah, but I can't overstate the importance of the fact that people need to feel safe, and also people need to feel comfortable. Many of our longstanding customers are uncomfortable in that environment, and that's why we've developed the virtual content. So it wasn't just exclusively a stopgap. I said, even if we are able to have this party in person, and now we are, we still want to be able to offer something to everybody. And so all of the seminars also will be available to the trade for free. They just need to reach out. And also anybody who's following along with the seminars can access the wines that we're featuring via our retail partners. So there is, it's different at home, but it doesn't mean that it's not convivial. It doesn't mean that it's not connected to our spirit at all.
It's done well. While we're on champagne, let's talk about that for a second. Tell me about some champagnes, producers.
Man, visiting in
trends, in your travels and in setting this up, what's kind of sort of stuck out, grabbed your attention?
Well, it's been a very difficult vintage this year, 2021 in Champagne, and that kind of reminds me of a few things that I think are worth paying attention to. But I'm not one to speak about trends because I think
I don't know if trends is a good word for champagne.
Oh, I hate that word. I hate that word for almost anything.
Yeah, Raj, I retract that. But tell me about some interesting wines, makers, things you've come across.
So a hand, it's very difficult to pick out specific things, but I want to call on a couple of experiences that the team and I had while we were in Champagne. One winery I'm super excited about and have been for quite some time is the domain Pierre Paillard, Antoine and Quentin Paillard, who took over from their father in the middle of the last decade, sort of progressively. I had the luck and experience. Peter had introduced Daniel to them just around the time I started at Daniel, and the brothers made a non-vintage cuvée that was our house cuvée with Daniel's name and our collaboration in terms of the dosage. It was such a great wine. We did really well with it for a number of years. We wanted to switch it up, and we moved on. But now I'm very happy to see that amongst the vintage wines and the single vineyard wines, Antoine and Quentin's own stamp is finally starting to be seen, because for the nature of Champagne is it's such a long game. They've been selling wines that were made by the previous generation, and so today I think we'll get an opportunity during La Fête to really see some of the brothers' work, and I think that they're some of the most exciting. Shall we call them new producers in Champagne? I mean, the domain's been around a long time, but there's some great evolution there. I think there's a huge movement on both the house and the grower side to kind of bridge the gap in between. And so you see producers like Henriot and Roeder. I'd like to just pull those two out because they come to mind, but not because they're the only ones by any means.
Right.
Who are growing their own grapes on land that they own to a great extent, but also purchasing grapes, but very often being very, very active in deciding, making important decisions about the farming and moving the farming in the direction of simply better farming, but specifically
Right.
organics, and in Roeder's case, and in Orio's case to some degree, biodynamics. Gilles de la Rousière, who's the president of Champagne Henriot and all of their companies, he actually said this to me in Burgundy in January, but it rang through and really was visible to me when we visited their vineyards in the summer in Champagne. He said, basically, one has to come to the understanding that we can't farm carelessly and still make anything that's interesting or viable in the market. The absolute bare minimum for quality is going to very soon be that we're at least organic. And I thought that was very forward thinking and smart for a CEO of a big company that hasn't always been that way, but is
Right.
taking the steps to go in that direction. Roeder is very well known for their commitment to
Right.
biodynamics, and they know, Jean-Baptiste Lecaillon might be one of the most knowledgeable people about farming
Right.
amongst dudes who wear suits.
What you said about the farming, where more people are moving towards it, applies to all of agriculture. By the way, if we don't change the way we farm around the world from here out, we're kind of screwed. I mean, it has to go to sustainability, regeneration.
I couldn't agree more. But Sam, that's not a quantifiable reality, or has not historically been the quantifiable reality in Champagne. Champagne's still a place where organics don't really amount to a large percentage. So the fact that I'm seeing that, and forgive me for using this word, trend, is very heartwarming. And on the flip side of that, to see growers who have come to the fiscal reality of being not able to acquire more land because simply the costs have become too high. Land prices are very high, to moving into a model that we saw in Burgundy a lot in the last 2 decades, because the prices of land jumped up there first, or in a more dramatic fashion, where they moved towards this negociant model, in fact, and they're purchasing grapes, but again, controlling the farming, paying attention to the land, and with a great deal of care. So I like the fact that the stark difference between those two categories of champagne has become murkier, and they've become closer and closer together. I like that because it's more unified, it's more coherent, and it's
definitely both important.
Yeah, and it's a positive. It's a positive for sure for consumables. Right. You want that stuff to taste good.
Good segue by bringing Burgundy up.
That place.
You guys also do La Paulée, which is really the granddaddy of the events. And recently, you started a thing called La Table, which is a nod towards the wines of the Rhone.
Exactly.
Those events will be taking place in 2022.
That's correct. So the Table dates are to be confirmed, but early in the year, and then March, we will be back with La Paulée. La Paulée was amongst the last big parties in the before times, and thank God it happened, because we all needed that party. But also, we are very lucky and happy that we didn't incur any kind of disaster as a result of it. Think about the timing.
Is there a set date for La Paulée, or are you working on firming that up?
You will get the press release in due time, but we're pretty set on it. It'll be in March. The reason we haven't confirmed the date also for January for La Table is just making sure that everything lines up. People can come, but you can think about it as the end of January 2022 for the Table, and the middle of March.
Paulée is, I hate to use the word similar, but it's similar to La Fête in the sense that it's a big celebration of Burgundy, and the producers come in and there's pourings and all these lunches and events.
Sure. Well, I should say that they're all similar in format, but nothing should be said to be similar to the Fête. If anything, everything is similar to the Paulée, because that was the initial event.
That's what I meant.
Right.
That's what I meant.
And it's based off of a party that happens in Meursault. And really all over Burgundy, but the big one is in Meursault, the La Paulée de Meursault, which is a 100-year-old celebration where the vigneron from the village bring wines to share with their colleagues and friends. It's a pretty glorious lunch. Usually starts at 1 and ends at midnight, and there's a little more drunk driving than I'm comfortable with. But it's the beauty of bringing it to New York is you got to bring the winemakers here, but then everyone gets to go in an Uber afterwards, so it's much safer.
Yeah, and Tablet is, I'm like you. I'm a big fan of Rhone wines, north
Yeah.
over south, but love both. Table is an ode and a festival to the wines of the Rhone region, right?
Exactly. And it connects both North and South in celebration, because I think in the US market, they've been thought of more as the same historically than anywhere else in France, for sure. I mean, they're pretty different regions, but the overlap in spirit is great. And it's a lot of fun. It's a smaller event, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about wines that are potentially underappreciated. Would you agree with me? I'm not talking about quality or the makers, but the Rhone wines, do they get the props and appreciation in the wine world beyond sommeliers?
I think that historically, for sure, there's been some love for the wines of the Rhone in the U.S., if only because Chateauneuf-du-Pape is fun to say.
Right.
But I'm not sure if it's grossly underrated. I certainly think that in terms of the value of the wines in the open market, the kind of attention that people pay to them with fine food, perhaps, it's possible that they've been a little overlooked. Maybe you're asking the wrong guy. I worked for 11 years for Daniel Beloud, who's from Lyon. And the Rhone is one of the most important categories of wine that's beloved and taken care of there. I mean,
I agree with you, but doing this show and talking to everybody from around the world, I think there are a lot of fans, but I think there are a lot of people that haven't had the exposure, or they just don't know as much about it. That has changed through the years, and there's a lot of good cheerleaders. But
sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
I think what you're saying is accurate. Yeah. I had a weird.
I think it's only getting better,
yeah.
and.
Yeah.
I think Table did that. I know Thomas and Dustin, did
the Reboul, certainly.
Yeah,
great.
So I mean, things are happening in a good way. Raj, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk to you a little more about Burgundy. I certainly want to talk to you about Pressoir. And a few other things. So we're talking to Raj Vaidya. Raj is the director of operations at Gracie Events, all these great events that are, upon us. You're listening to The Grape Nation on the Heritage Radio Network.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheese-making culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheese-making craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Okay, we're back. We're back with my guest, Raj Vaidya. Raj, I wanted to talk to you in the vein of, or in the subject of Burgundy. I wanted to ask you, because you've been around it and you've literally been on the ground in Burgundy. Does it bother you that Burgundy is made by literally farmer winemakers? I mean, these guys are out in the field as much as, they're in the cellar. Many of them are organic and even biodynamic. A lot of these wines are made in small batches. And getting to my point, these wines are now almost inaccessible and priced beyond comprehension. I mean, is that where Burgundy was supposed to go? And I'll have a follow-up question that'll sort of, the follow-up question will be, where are the values? What should we drink? But does it bother you that, it's like this big boomer rich guy thing?
It does bother me that the audience is necessarily different on account of the fact that the value has gone so high. But I should say this. I mean, Um, there's a lot of contributing factors to that. The biggest of which is completely out of the hands of the Burgundians, which is to say that there's very little wine. There's a giant market for it, and amongst those markets, the two driving factors are wealthy people in Asia and wealthy people in America who want what they want and are willing to pay whatever it takes. That is a little painful because I see certainly that the next generation of wine lovers, and I'm not only talking about collectors, I'm talking about people who drink wine in restaurants, I'm talking about sommeliers and cavistes or other retailers, journalists for sure, and just people who love wine. Burgundy is often completely ignored by them because they have to ignore it because they can't afford it. The barrier to entry is too high. The access is low. And then, once that becomes pervasive, it fades out of the psyche, actually. And, I have a lot of young friends who are really robust wine drinkers who never even think about these wines. It's not even in their consciousness. So there's a bunch of things that I think are important to engage with to avoid that happening to a region that I think is so important. I don't want to see it becoming exclusively the playground of the rich. There's a couple of things that Daniel started to do before I joined the company, and I actually participated a fair bit with one of the initiatives, which was that he created a sommelier scholarship, which relied on support from producers in Burgundy at first to raise funds to then take sommeliers from the U.S. On a trip to Burgundy to meet the producers, see them in the fields, as you said, to see them in their cellars, oftentimes in their cellars, because let's be frank, it almost always happened in January. And it was cold outside. But really giving them a sense for the culture, the concept of sharing wine with each other, what's so special about the place and what's interesting about the wines. But, without cultural context and a human context, it can be very hard for that to come into people's psyche. So kudos to Daniel for coming up with that. I mean, we did a lot of work on that, and it's something that's going to continue to grow. I'm getting tired of saying this, but it seems like we've been stuck in some sort of legal limbo of establishing it as a proper 501c3. But that is coming in the new year, we hope. We're sure by our lawyers. What do I know? I mean, I think the pandemic actually kind of our timing was kind of unfortunate with regards to our application, but I'm convinced that it's moving forward, and we can continue to teach that concept. And I think the same thing will be true for Champagne and then down the road for other regions, and we'll be able to educate that way. The other thing that I think is super important is to focus away from the rarity and expense and more closely on the producers. And I think that's something that we do pretty well because our relationships are more important to us than almost anything, especially in places like Burgundy. The story of the winemaker, who's doing something interesting, what they're doing, what they're actually doing in the vines, for example, I think is super important. During the Palais, which was all virtual in 2021, in January, in March, Pascaline, my dear friend and absolute hero in the wine world, Pascaline Lepelletier,
yes, frequent guest on this show.
Yeah, she's a regular. She agreed to help put together one of the seminars, and we spoke to a bunch of vignerons, some very famous, some less so, and see what they were doing in terms of farming. And that gave us the opportunity to shine a light also on some sort of young up-and-coming producers, but also some classic producers who've been around a long time but have recognized the importance of farming. And really, we did a deep dive. It was great, a very great learning experience for me and for many others, I believe. That sort of focus, again, on the place as opposed to the price, I think is very helpful because, a lot of the wines that we talked about are not excessively expensive and offer incredible value and real character and real depth.
So let's get into that. Let's get into that. So for everyone else, what are some of the good alternatives to inaccessible and expensive Burgundy? And I say alternatives because, people have been drinking Aligote, for years, and some people never heard of it.
Aligote should be paid a lot more attention to.
And I'm not pointing that out for you to get into, but talk to me about, how do we drink Burgundy?
Let me give you a tidbit. I've got the insider scoop for you. It's hotter now than it was before. So when a place gets warmer, in a region that's as diverse as Burgundy, although it's two grapes, effectively one landscape, there's a lot of side valleys. There's
Diverse
a lot of cool,
terroir and climates.
cooler appellations than
Right.
others. So start to think about those cool places like Saint-Romain, Pernon-Vergelès. Pernon-Vergelès is super interesting to me right now. To some extent, Savigny-les-Beaunes, although you'd have to look to the north-facing slopes to see the big difference. In times which have gotten quite a bit warmer, these cooler appellations might be able to offer not only great value because their status as far as appellations is not as lofty as places like Vosne-Romanée and Corton, but also there might be a more interesting level of balance to be found in the wines on account of the fact that they are cooler. They do see a little less direct sunlight and less heat from the day. So that's one little tidbit I think is useful. There's a lot of young producers who are starting out who are not able to buy their own vines. And so the old historic concept in Burgundy was that the negociants blend stuff and the growers make more terroir specific wines, and there's some sort of inherent greatness to the grower model because it's so tiny and so artisan. Well, tiny and artisan translates into the world of negociants on the big and small scale, but certainly you should look to producers who are negociants but are young and starting out, and working with interesting appellations like Choret-les-Beaunes. Beaune itself, I think, remains a totally underrepresented appellation in the quality scale, especially at the Premier Cru level, where you're really seeing wines of equal quality to Volnay Premier Cru, Pommard Premier Cru, Chassagne-Montrachet, and Pouligny even on occasion, and way less expensive and more accessible. But very often you're looking towards the negociant model in order to be able to see that today. And the reason is simply just acquiring land is insanely expensive.
Right.
The biggest reason that acquiring land has become insanely expensive is because of outside investment and just the fact that most people who are buyers now are either a couple of French billionaires or people in the similar category from the US or China, Hong Kong, Japan, etc.
Yeah, that's changed. Yeah.
Well, it's changed what the future of Burgundy will look like, because those models are not money-making models, but they're also not farming models, really. The concept is the only way that kind of investment gets paid off is by selling the investment at a profit. Right. And so the hope and dream is that most of them are vanity projects, because that means that they'll keep making great wine forever, and a lot of them are. So that's good. In that sense, although it makes the wines expensive, it also kind of protects it to some degree, because if it can be a métier that doesn't rely on viability in the market, then perhaps that works out. But remember that Burgundy isn't just the Côte d'Or. There's even within the Côte d'Or, there's lesser known appellations, but I feel like people should pay more attention to appellations like Aussi d'Urès, Saint-Brie up near Chablis, and Petit Chablis as appellations. I think Petit Chablis especially, which was a freakishly cold area and therefore a separate defined area that was thought of as like lesser. But really, Petit Chablis is not lesser in quality than Chablis appellation. It's just a different place, and it's cooler and it's fresher, and with a little bit of luck, it tends not to be the place that gets hailed or frosted aggressively, which has been a reality. Both have been realities in Chablis for quite some time. And then I'd urge people to look a little further south. Despite the warmth of the region, the varieties and the genetics of the Macon and the Chalanet are pretty well suited to making wine in those regions. And I think that historically they've been sort of shunned in terms of the quality spectrum, and have never reached crazy prices, which is good. But there's some really, really intriguing and compelling wines being made down there.
In the Macon and Chalanet.
Absolutely.
So those are all, there's a lot to bite into there. And I thank you for, pointing us towards that. So the reality is that there are still accessible and delicious wines in Burgundy. just a couple of quick things, and then I want to talk about Pressoir for a couple of minutes.
Great.
I want to point out, and this is not negative at all, but it's more of a service to my listeners. That your events are not cheap. They appeal to, anyone, but there's a lot of, upper echelon wine lovers and all of that, the collectors. So it's a great opportunity for that person, and it's open to anyone else. So I wanted to point that out, but there's a cost to anything of that quality. The last thing I wanted to ask you before Pressoir is, does the auction market blow up stuff like Burgundy? I mean, are they not helping? Are they inconsequential? Because the numbers
far from inconsequential. The auction market is the market in Burgundy, and it's frightening.
It is frightening. So I'm sure. Right about what I'm saying.
You're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
And there are definitely a handful of culprits that are culprits.
Totally. And going back to what you said about the expense, for sure, Burgundy events are expensive, period. And our dinners, when we have to acquire the wines from Burgundians to serve, they get astronomical pretty quickly. And, we're buying wines in the same market as everybody else, even if we're buying.
Like
directly.
I said, there's no negative to that.
No, not at all.
Somebody says this sounds cool. They go online and they go, $800 for a lunch.
Totally. And the galas tend to be pretty expensive. It's true. But as you can imagine, it costs, especially, even pre-COVID, but maybe even more so now, it costs a lot to throw a party for 400 people. But I would like to say that thanks to Pressoir, and this will be our lead in, I think that's your job, but I got you on this one, Sam. Thanks to Pressoir.
Raj, let me tell you about some more good Burgundies. No, go ahead. Tell me about Pressoir. There's a wide
range of possibilities of the kinds of experiences that people can engage with. And that's kind of the point of Pressoir as a platform, is that, between our club and the virtual events we do and the live dinners we do offer access and experiences at various price levels. And that's important. That's important to us for the same reasons, as I said, making the regions more accessible and just making sure they don't get forgotten.
I can attest to that, because the things you discussed, there are, I don't know if it happened or not, but there was, an event, the Hill of Cortone, and then there's another event, where there's like newer Burgundian winemakers, where the exposure and even the cost, varied, which gives, anybody an opportunity, like you said, point of entry could be, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. Check out our website, pressoir.wine, because we do events often. We're continuously building the schedule of events. My colleague, Edouard Bourgeois, who's a truly brilliant communicator about wine and definitely not exclusively a fancy wine guy, despite his very French name. I love the fact that he brings the same level of excitement and passion to the wines, for example, of the Loire Valley that we're serving tomorrow night, that they're serving tomorrow night in my absence, because I'm here in LA, as he does to the Hill of Cortone and to the great wines of the Côte de Nuit, and on and on and on. And so for sure, check it out. He do a bunch of good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad, we spread it out, that there are events, for everyone. And like you said, Loire, not just Burgundy. And Edouard is a pretty damn good piano player. Did you know that?
I did know that. I'm glad that you know that as well, Sam.
I saw from the special club thing that he did.
Yeah, we did.
I saw some clips. I mean, this guy was just wailing.
Edouard created the whole thing. He paired music to the wines that we were going to pour, and then performed the music. And he's just the best.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So at the end of the show, we will spend a few minutes where everyone can get all the information on everything.
Great.
But nobody leaves the show without answering our wine list. You did it once before. I'd be curious to compare. Same questions. We're about to approach our 200th show, and we've asked everybody
Do you have my answers from last time? I don't remember.
I don't, and I screwed up. I think it's more fun because I don't want to lead you or whatever. But I'll post them side by side because
I'll answer with current answers anyway. So
well, that's what I want.
Yeah,
you know where your head is at now. All right. So first question is, and you may have sort of addressed this in some ways, but what are you drinking now? What's is it champagne for the Lafayette? Is it Loire because Edward's doing something? Are you trying new stuff in the fridge? Somebody bring you stuff? What's your current taste now?
So the Indian summer has left me stuck in sort of a summer mindset. Champagne is certainly very high on my list, not just because the event's coming up. Frankly, I recently told a new friend that I shamelessly have a champagne agenda to get people to drink champagne as wine.
I'm with you.
And so I do drink a lot of champagne. It eats up most of my budget. I've been drinking.
Can I ask you something? Wait,
sure.
I didn't mean to.
Please.
Is it hard for you? And you don't have to. If I say to you, give me a favorite or two, do you try to stay away from that just because there's so many and you're so embedded in all of this, or can you? I don't want to back you against.
I absolutely can. I mean, and it doesn't preclude any of the other great wines I love, but I'll point out again, just currently. So Sunday this past, I had the first sort of new version of Roederer's. Call it 252. 252. Is it 252 or 242? Now I'm forgetting, but
I think it's 242. I was actually at the.
You're getting ahead of things here.
Go ahead. So Roederer 242.
So which is, as Jean-Baptiste Lecaillon explained to me, I thought very eloquently, he decided to no longer make a consistent wine when he can make a better wine, and so kind of following the model of the editions that Krug makes, for example, it'll be a non-vintage or a multi-vintage wine, which is unique. And so it replaces Brut Premier, and I think it's absolutely spectacular. We're going to talk about one of my favorite producers in Champagne, and this comes from a place of love as much as it does of critical tasting, Vincent Laval, because I'd like to hear your thoughts of it while you sip it while I'm finishing my morning coffee here in LA. A shout out to a couple of dear friends, Rodolphe Peters, Raphael Baresh, Alexander Chartogne, and Jérôme Prévost. These guys probably make up like 60% of my total wine consumption.
Really?
Which means that I have to work very hard because it's not an inexpensive habit.
No.
But let me go to a couple of other things that I'm drinking, because I've been drinking a fair bit of wine from the Jura of late. I love Stéphane Tissot, and I've been drinking a couple of bottles, both sparkling and still wines from him. Not much Loire been in my glass in the last few weeks, peculiarly, but a fair bit of German Riesling. Again, it's just been so warm in New York. It's funny, it's colder in LA right now than it is in New York. And so Peter Lauer, Barrel X, I could just drink a bottle of that in like 15 seconds.
And it's very reasonable, yeah.
So cheap. And then I always say everyone should drink more Cabinet Riesling. The 2020 vintage in the Mosel is spectacular. I got to taste, against my rules, because I bought a case of each, with the intention of aging them, because I had a great bottle of Willi Schaefer Domprost Cabinet 2015 the other night. I bought one case of each, the Domprost and the Himmelreich 2020, and I couldn't help myself. I pulled a bottle of each to taste, and man, they're delicious. So
those are good ones.
That's a lot of it. It'll change as the weather gets cold, but I'm okay with it staying warm.
That's a trove of some good stuff, and like I said, I'm going to post everything. All right, so this is a good one to go back and compare. I asked you favorite wine and food pairing. Not something you eat every night, every week, every month, but something that, is like a good, this works.
Yeah, I had something the other day that kind of blew my mind. I've been on this kick of because apparently I need more expensive habits. So I buy fish at the green market all the time. And this is the time of year in New York. It might be fleeting. I probably shouldn't tell everybody this because now I'm going to have to compete for these pieces. But blowfish from Long Island, you get the tails from the green market right now. And it's kind of a blubbery fish. I put them on the grill, and they make you look like a genius because they're kind of a blank palate. They basically taste like chicken. And because they're so blubbery, you can't can't really overcook them. You can leave them on too long and they get more caramelized, but they don't get tough or anything like that. And so I had spiced some of those with a little bit of miso. I put them on the grill. They got really nice and caramelized outside. And I was like, very much thinking about champagne and white wine, but we had a red wine open while I was with friends drinking this or tasting this dish. And it was a wine that I got turned on to in the spring. A producer in, I guess, San Luis Obispo, Santa Rita Hills, or rather inland a bit from there, but Southern California. I'm not sure exactly where this vineyard is, to be honest with you, but it's Santa Barbara area, a winery called Amaviv. And it's a blend, a field blend. I don't even know what the grape varieties are in there.
So it's a bunch of grape varieties. Yeah, it could be anywhere from like 3 to 8 or whatever.
It's quite a few. I know.
So
the label Scar of the Sea buys grapes from this vineyard, but this is a wine that they make themselves. And I was just like, it was light, fruity, a little bit salty, a little bit spicy. And with the spiced miso and that richness of the blowfish, I thought it was a home run. And I like it. I like it when I look like I know what I'm doing, even if it was by chance.
I could also tell you that nobody has ever thrown that one up as a.
If I can't buy blowfish next weekend at the Green Market, I'm going to be mad.
Just a side note, we have a boat. We fish a lot off of Long Island, and
oh, cool!
You just throw a little chum pot down, and you get blowfish by the dozen.
Right, but it seems seasonal, right? I mean, at least they're not available at the market outside of this time.
More towards the end of the season, they're available. They seem to come around.
End of summer.
That's a good one. Think about this one. Third question. I know there was COVID and the pandemic, and I know you're a busy guy, but do you have any favorite wine restaurants and or bars?
Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
Where you walk in, the vibe, the list, the creativity. Let me hear yours. And okay. I'll preface this by saying whatever you say is what you like, but it doesn't exclude anyone. And there are other places, but these are the ones you're mentioning now.
Totally. And I'll also add the caveat that if there's places that I like to go to that are hard to get into, I'm not going to tell you about them. You got to figure them out for yourself. But a handful of my favorites. But anyway, it's not like anything's that secret in New York anymore. But also, frankly, post-COVID, the number of options are more limited for sure, unfortunately, because a bunch of places have closed or haven't reopened fully. I go to the Four Horsemen as often as I can. I think it's one of the greatest wine restaurants in New York, and that's true pre and through and post-COVID.
I totally agree.
It's one of the few places with a real cellar. The food is fantastic, really out of this world. And
Nick Curtol is a great chef.
Amazing chef. Has some history in that my favorite all-time restaurant of New York. He worked there, Franny's in Brooklyn.
Yeah. And I think Nick may be writing a cookbook.
I think he might be, and that's good news because some of the magic that he does should be shared.
We love that one. Give me more.
All right. In my neighborhood, it's a little bit tough to drink great wine because there's like 6 million restaurants and many of them are not that good, frankly. But I got to shout out Hearth, one of my favorite restaurants in New York in general. And also it's not the fanciest wine list. They used to have a bunch of older wine back in the day, but now it's more focused on younger vintages, but very well curated, very honest, and just a lovely vibe.
Well, it's been there forever, and Paul Greco was the wine guy for a long time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they got rid of all of Paul's wines by now. It's been more than 10 years that he's been out there.
Not alluding.
But now that you mention it, one of the best places to drink champagne, and this is probably going to piss Paul off a little bit that I say this, but it remains true because he's not much of a champagne guy, is Terroir in Tribeca. So you should definitely go there as well. And then, where else have I been drinking? Company, always great. It's been a while since I've been, but they have a cool outdoor situation. Actually, hopefully that they can keep that up. I think that everyone should go to Dhamaka, the restaurant I mentioned. This is a shameless plug now, okay? So forgive me this.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Dhamaka is an Indian restaurant. Ravi, what's his name? A couple of guys and the chef have a few restaurants.
Ronnie and Chintan. I think that in many ways, Chintan is like having his moment in the culinary field of New York that David Chang had in 2004 and 5. Indian food that has been sort of shoved off into the corner or specific pigeonholes for a long time. is bursting out in an interesting way. He's
Very
so dynamic. Yeah, and an amazing guy. It's funny, we have a lot of crossover. Like, we grew up in the same town. He busts my chops and says that I was the rich kid because I lived in South Bombay. But truthfully, the area he lived in Bombay, I used to think was a suburb back when I was a kid. But we both lived in Atlanta and Singapore, and randomly he's now moved because he's a young father. And he has a young family. He lives in Jersey, in the town I graduated high school from.
That is crazy. So, what's the wine list? They paid attention to it.
Well, I paid attention to it. Honestly, it's and I want to be clear here. It's not going to change your mindset. You're not going to see wines on there that are super rare or anything like that. It's an honest, simple, young list, and appropriate for the neighborhood and appropriate for the restaurant that, they're going to make money on it, but they're able to price everything quite fairly. But the focus on actually pairing cuisine like that with fine wine is something that I've always wanted to do. And with Daniel and the team, we were able to do, I think, in a really cool way. With insight also from my own experience, because the sad truth is there is no culture for Indian food and wine.
No,
it doesn't exist. No. And the reason for that is just people don't drink and eat at the same time in India. You go to a cocktail party, you booze for like 3 hours while eating fried snacks. Then you sit down to dinner and you drink water. That's the culture. That's the truth. And so to be able to see the alternate side of that and combine my love for wine and experience of European culture with the cuisine of India is very cool. And also simply, it's one of the most delicious restaurants I've ever eaten in my life. I love those guys. I love their food. So
all of those ending with Dhamaka are great recos. We got to move to our next question because we're running out of time. And this is another good comparison question. I asked you your favorite all-time wine, and I'm not sure if then I said to you, initially, when I framed the question, it was like, Raj, what's the most rare, expensive wine you ever drank?
I said 45 Romani Conti. I remember now.
You do? So then the question has morphed to, Raj, what's the wine that is significant to you, important, maybe changed the way you were thinking, maybe was a gateway wine, and that plays away from, rare and cost, necessarily. When you now look at what you've been doing all these years, is there a wine or two that just had an influence on you?
Yeah, well, if I can, I'll take it all the way back to the beginning and talk about the one that made the light go off.
That's it.
Early in my career, working at a restaurant called the Ryland Inn, still exists, different ownership, different situation.
Still a good place, though.
I hear. I haven't been in years, but it was a very different place at the time. Very ambitious, Relais and Chateau, crazy great wine cellar. My first wine job. I was tasked with pairing wines with the tasting menu, but also tasked with not buying anything because they had a bunch of inventory. I found 20 odd or 30 odd bottles of a 1971 3-star Auslese Riesling from Christoffel. And I was like, I don't know if these are going to be any good. Dark glass. I couldn't tell if it was dark glass or dark wine. It was dark glass. It was green glass, obviously. But I didn't know that much about wine at the time, so I didn't know any better. I pulled the foil off, and it's completely covered. The cork is completely covered in mold, and it stinks to high hell. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be gross. Wiping it off, cleaning it up, getting the cork out in crumbles, tiny pieces everywhere, cork into the wine. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a disaster, but got to try it, see if it's going to work. Poured it in a glass, and it was the most brilliant color of gold I'd ever seen. I put it into my nose and was transported to an entirely different place. And just the notion that this creature, at the time it was probably, it was certainly the early 2000s, so it was about 30 years old. The concept that a white wine could last that long, could smell this compelling and still have so much fruit, to completely take me to a different place. I'd never been to the Mosel. Years later, when I first visited, it smelled the same, and it was stamped in my mind's eye and my nose so clearly, and it still is. I'm smelling it right now in my memory.
Do you know, looking back, was 71 any kind of decent year?
It was like the best year of the 70s, yeah.
Oh, it was, okay. So that it translated.
Yeah,
all right.
People say 76, but I like 71 better personally.
No. But
and
it
then
was
on
a
the
strong
palate,
vintage.
it just blew my mind because it had a sweetness to it, but its length and its salinity and its minerality and how much it spoke of the place where it came from was mind blowing. In retrospect, I shouldn't have paired it with foie gras. That's what I did because I was stupid and they said sweet wine with foie gras, and I took that out of a book and followed along. But today I would pair that with either something like pheasant or a very, very delicate fish. But nonetheless,
Right.
that wine taught me that wine is more than alcoholic beverage in bottle. It is places, people, and time.
That's a good one. All right, last question. And Raj, I got to remind you, we're running out of time.
Sorry.
You should be, nothing to do with you. You should be able to answer this. I asked my guests, best wine recommend around 15, 20, 22 bucks. Give me a red, give me a white. It could be a region, like Muscadet. I always say my kids are in their 20s. They can't afford, to give crappy wine, but they also can't afford $45, So give me a couple of wines.
Okay.
In that price
I'll
range.
I'll give you two relatively precise wines just because they come to mind and they fit the category. One I've spoken about in sort of categorically, which is Cabinet Riesling. But rather than the Cabinet Riesling, I think if we look for a very simple regional Riesling from Germany, that's almost always the best bang for your buck. And so I would go with the Limestone Riesling, and he makes this in both the dry and off-dry cabinet format by Klaus-Peter Keller from the Rheinhessen.
Right.
Just purely delicious and
in that price
almost
range?
Like rainwater. Yeah, absolutely.
To,
Limestone shouldn't hit the shelves more than 22, 25. And his Fonderfels, for example, is the more expensive one now, but this is a slightly more basic level of his quality level offerings. And a red, I would drink probably something from Spain, something from Catalonia. There's a producer named Pardas, I think makes really fantastic wines. And
spell
P-A-R, P like Peter, A-R like
right.
Robert, D like David, A-S like Sally.
Pardas.
Celer Pardas, you should totally check those out. None of their wines are very expensive, but especially the sort of light fruity reds that they make. Absolutely delicious, pair really well with food, chill them a bit, and they're drinkers.
All right, so those are good ones. And like I said earlier, I'm going to post all your answers, and I'm also going to look back at your other ones and see how, Raj, you've grown as a wine person. All right, so we end the show every week with a segment called the Weekly Wine Sip. Each week we taste a different wine on air. This week, Raj was nice enough to send over a champagne, the Georges Laval Cumier Premier Cru Brut Nature Non-Vintage champagne. Raji, I got it in front of me. Tell me a little about this, producer and the champagne.
Vincent Laval is one of my absolute favorite people in the world, and certainly amongst the best winemakers, I think, that's out there. Driven completely from the farming. He's also somewhat lucky in that his father never used chemicals in the vineyards. So they've been organic and certified organic for more than 40, 50 years. Making some single vineyard wines. This is a blend of a few of the vineyards, but all within Cumier. He only makes 2.5 hectares, so it's a tiny production. And I think he makes wines with a tremendous intensity for sure, but because of the farming being so excellent, there's a real clarity and precision to the wines, not only because, but certainly partially because he's also able to make them in a undosed style. So there's no dosage. It's a
explain what that is.
Brut Nature. There's no sugar added at the
Brut Nature means no sugar, right?
No dosage specifically for the sugar. Yeah, and he certainly doesn't use any chaptalization, i.e. pre-fermentation for sugar to boost the alcohol content, because that's not necessary anymore. And he hasn't had to do that anyway because of his farming being so excellent, and because the Cumier vineyards face south, so they gain ripeness pretty well. But also, he doesn't like to have sugar kind of distracting from the wine, and that's something that came about in the 90s. He discovered that he liked to present his wines this way, frankly, because most of the time his customers would taste the wine at his cellar before he sold them, prior to disgorgement. So we would disgorge them a la minute, serve them, taste them collectively, and then sell them a wine later that had some dosage. So effectively, it was almost like a bait and switch. So he went back to the model of everything being brut nature. Meunier, a little bit of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, very salty.
What's the percentages?
It depends.
Is it more Meunier? I mean, I know it varies.
This
bottle
in 2018, the answer is not only do I not know, but I don't care. He is about the.
But he does use.
He
uses Meunier.
He uses Meunier, which is typical in that part of the region. But that's not the important question, because it's really these wines transcend the variety, especially with a blend having all three, and it's really about the place. It really explains Cumières, which is a south-facing area, really closer to Montagne de Reims or like the hills south of Epernay than the proper Vallée de la Marne, even though it's technically on the Marne in the Vallée de la Marne.
So I have it in front of me. It's got a beautiful, golden color. Not light, not super deep, but really a nice golden.
Yeah.
I've tasted it a bunch of times. I get white fruits. I get the fruits coming out. The mouthfeel is, I would use the word luxurious, but not pointing towards unctuous. It just, feels good in the mouth.
Yeah, it's got some richness to it. I mean, it's 2018.
Yeah, that's the word, not fat, right. But, rich.
It's rich for sure, because it is 2018, which is a warm vintage everywhere in France, certainly.
And that'll give you that richness, the warm vintage.
Exactly.
Right?
This plays the role of his, entry level, but it's not really a non-vintage. He doesn't use much of any reserve wine. Right. So you'll see on the back, it says lot 018 or 0018, and that refers to the vintage of the harvest. And it was warm, and therefore it does have a richness. But again, that richness is not coming from sugar; it's coming from ripeness, from the fruit. And at the same time, I don't like talking about this fruit or that, because I find that everyone's experience with wines and fruits is frankly different. It always annoys me when my friends say things like, curry leaf or gooseberry. It's like, who the hell knows what that stuff tastes like? I know what a curry leaf tastes like.
I have trouble with that.
Yeah. Unless you grew up in New Jersey, in America, it's hard to come by the curry leaf thing. But
that's right.
What I like to focus on is really just that saltiness that's so pervasive. And
there is a salinity to it. You're right.
And it really makes the wine's length apparent to me. Like when you taste that wine.
What pairs well with this? Finish what you were saying and then tell me about
simply pairing. To say that it contributes to the length. And for me, that's the quality measure. It's like when I've tasted a wine, how long the experience of it. And it doesn't always have to be the exact flavors, but the experience of that wine stays with my psyche, with my mind, with my body. That's a sign of quality. I would pair, again, Champagne agenda means that champagne pairs well with everything, but also
But this is a richer, warm weather champagne. I mean, get specific here.
Yeah, I think that you move away from, the sort of notion of raw fish, caviar, things like that. Certainly something salty is appropriate, but I almost think you can go with like a Spanish ham.
That'd be cool.
I had this amazing ham at my friend Andre Mack's place, a great place to drink, by the way. And Sons
it's
in
a
Brooklyn.
ham bar.
A ham bar. He turned me onto this ham called Lady Edison. I had never heard about it, but apparently it's quite famous.
American
it's American. Everything he serves is American.
Okay.
And that with some Laval, I think would make a proper Sunday.
So Lady Edison and Laval, that's your other wine and food pairing. All right, so this is the Georges Laval Cumières Premier Cru Brut Nature non-vintage champagne. Raj, thank you for that. It was a treat. We have to wrap up. If you have a question, suggestion, wine happening, or event, hit me up at sam@thegrapenation.com. That's sam@thegrapenation.com. Subscribe to the Grape Nation podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Take a second or two to hit the subscribe button. This way, without potchering around, you'll get Raj's interview sent to you when you're ready to go. Follow us on Instagram at @SBenRuby. In the same vein, hit your notifications. This way you'll know when the new shows come around and who the guests are. On Twitter, we're at BenRuby. On Instagram, we're at @SBenRuby, but you can always use the hashtag The Grape Nation. As I mentioned, we will post Raj's wine list and the weekly wine sip we just tasted on our social media sites. Raj, We've talked about a lot of different things, which I think will pique a lot of people's interests. First of all, if we want to find where you, Raj, are on social media, where do we go?
So my personal handle is Raj Vine, Rajvine. Apologies in advance for that because I'm terrible.
You were a young kid when you picked that.
Oh, not for the handle, but for the content. I'm terrible at this stuff.
Oh, okay.
But and then, so each of the festivals and Pressoir each have their own handles also. So at pressoir.wine.
Pressori is Pressoir. OIR. I'm sorry. I have it in front of me. I'm just mildly not dyslexic.
And if you just search Lafette, La Palais, and La Table, you'll find us fairly easily.
Right. And each one has their own sites and information. And really right in front of us is La Fête de Champagne, which is coming up in November. So that's the one you want to start with and get all the information. Raj, I want to thank you for coming back on. We had a lot to talk about. Thanks for your perspectives on what's going on in the business, talking about some wines, answering all our stuff, sending in the champagne. Thank you for that. Thank you to our engineer, Armin, and everyone at the Heritage Radio Network. I'm Sam Ben-Ruby, and you've been listening to The Grape Nation.
Thanks, Sam.
The Grape Nation is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at heritage_radio. You can also find us at facebook.com/Heritage Radio Network. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be part of the food world's most innovative community? Subscribe to the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join the HRN family by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. And thanks for listening.